And something years ago the mushroom said to me, which deals with this, was people are always this question of enlightenment. And the mushroom said, for one human being to expect to obtain enlightenment from another is like a grain of sand on the beach expecting to attain enlightenment from another grain of sand on the beach. Don't you get it? You're all grains of sand. I mean, Joe Schmo, who runs a body shop, and Mukta Ruby Baba are the same people. There's no difference between those two guys. No reason to assume so. But at least there was a new thought, a new try, a new hope. This is the consequences of consciousness. And we're beset by problems like this. And we shouldn't assume that they are insoluble simply because we haven't solved them. In fact, we must assume that they are soluble, or else we are not going to have a place to hang our hat in 50 years. But the solutions come through an act of humility, an act of opening to the dynamic of nature, the feminine, the psyche. The ego is the calcareous knot of tumorous tissue that stands outside of all that and cannot be trusted and cannot be relied upon. And so by attempting to dissolve that, to mitigate its hard edges, to smooth it out into the greater context of being, then we really discover what humanness is about, because humanness is not something that can be encompassed from the point of view of the ego. That's why, having created the ultimately egoistic society, we've created a society with so little humanity in it, you know? And I see the psychedelics as a siren song calling us back to what is authentic, to what is real, and to what, instead of closing off our future options, begins to open them up so that we can see that, you know, human beings are a part of the larger universal destiny, and we can comport ourselves with grace and dignity and make the world a better place than we found it, which is certainly not our record so far. But it's not too late. I mean, H.G. Wells called history a race between education and disaster. It's not mere coincidence, nor even mere synchronicity, that at this moment in time and space, with these tremendous crises bearing down upon us, that we have reached out to the archaic peoples with a new attitude, not an attitude of how can we enslave them, but how can we learn from them. My hope is that here in the final ticking of the clock of history, we are going to end our prodigal descent into the desert world of the ego and return with what we have learned, the fruits of the prodigal journeying of the errant son, which is what history has been, return with the fruits of that prodigal wandering to the larger human family that waits on us in the rainforests, in the deserts, in the marshes, in the thorn forests of this planet. The archaic people are waiting for us to get on the train, and then the train will be able to depart. But we have to awaken to our past, and then we can set a course toward a meaningful future. That's the wrap, basically. So let me explain something. The DMT flash is very brief. The mushroom experience is very long, hours. You can, if you are fortunate and took enough, On a psilocybin trip, you can work your way into a place which looks like a DMT flash, but it will take you a couple of hours of breath control and sitting in darkness and paying attention to get to this place. So I wanted to make clear that for my money, these hallucinogens all pretty much lead into the same place, but the experience of psilocybin and DMT is very different, if only because one is tremendously gradual, although it may not seem like that when it's happening, but compared to DMT, it's very gradual. It unfolds over several hours, while the other, you measure the DMT flash in hundreds of seconds. I mean, it is a flash, for sure. Okay. I'll just make my way through these, and we'll do as many as we have time for, and I guess we'll go till about 4. A recent LA Times Magazine article on Mayan excavation made passing reference to hallucinogenic enemas. Any knowledge of such practice? Good question, and humorous. Enemas were invented by the New World Indians, strangely enough. It was a route of drug administration unknown to Roman or Greek medicine. The reason the people of the Amazon basin invented enemas, 2 reasons really. First of all, they had these very strong corrosive drugs that they wanted to find a route of administration for. And the second reason was they had rubber. The South American forests are the source of rubber. So they invented the first enema, the first hot water bottle, and God knows what else. Decency should probably not even inquire. I've never taken a hallucinogenic enema, but in principle it may not be a bad idea with some things that are very sickening or like that. If you do an enema, though, remember that you cut doses to 1/3. You don't do a full dose that way, or you'll leave a human-shaped hole in the roof. Once the European contact began, enemas became just a fad in Europe, and they were even doing tobacco smoke enemas at one point, which is really weird. Okay. Please explain, I guess it says, propagation and appropriate dosage of betel nuts and kava. I don't know too much about betel nuts. That's Piper beetle. It's a vice throughout Southeast Asia. You probably all know the song from South Pacific, Bloody Mary's chewing betel nut. That's what that's about. Kava is Piper methysticum. This is a plant that occurs throughout Oceania and Micronesia, and has very exotic chemistry. Bisnoryangonine and norbeocysteine are the active principles. These 2 compounds are known otherwise only from a mushroom. Kava is a kind of dreamy intoxicant. You don't feel like doing much, but you really enjoy just sitting there on the beach, and it's soporific kind of. It causes a bizarre condition which is called crocodilianism. And crocodilianism is where your skin dries and cracks and migrates into little pyramidal shapes. And when Captain Cook landed in the Hawaiian Islands, he was, of course, meeting the high mucky-mucks of the Hawaiian royalty. He thought everybody had leprosy. He didn't know what kind of a hell he'd fallen into until they put it together and said, no, these are the royal families. All of these people are suffering from kava addiction, crocodilianism. It's not pleasant tasting. It's not a pleasant high. But recently I was in another state, and I had an errand to go. A very chance errand carried me to the house of someone I didn't know. And there on the table in this house was this huge bowl, this carved Fijian kava bowl. And I walked over and looked at it, and it was full of this milky, creamy stuff. And I stuck my finger in and I tasted it, and it was kava. And I turned to the lady of the house. I said, "What's the story?" And she said, "My husband was in the Peace Corps in Fiji. He loves this stuff." And so then I met him and talked to him about it. He said, "I'm a chronic alcoholic. I can't touch a drink. I can't touch a drop, but I drink this, and I love it." And I said, "Well, do you know about crocodilianism?" And he said, "Oh, yes." And he lifted up his shirt and scratched his chest, and a huge cloud of dandruff rose. So sometimes you never know. It's the people I hang out with. Could you ask the mushroom what we should do about George Bush? I have hope for the man. He has such a botanically promising name. The ones that I'm not reading aloud are the ones which seem to go to areas of my concern that I haven't addressed here today, so I don't carry you over into them. This is an important question. What is your view of introducing psychedelics to children and the initiation of children into altered states? This is so controversial, so hot, that other than reading the question, I'm not sure what I could say. At the Bridge Conference at Stanford a few weeks ago, there was a women's panel. Kat was on it, Carolyn Garcia, Cindy Palmer-Horowitz, Nina Gravois, some of the great psychedelic women. And this is very important to discuss. Some of you may have read Odd John by Robert Bly, where he makes a tremendous case that fathers should provide initiatory experiences for their children. And, you know, we're not talking an overnight trout fishing trip here, folks. I think this definitely needs to be discussed. I'd be more comfortable with women discussing it, because I think women are the caregivers and the child rearers largely. But it's really a problem. I mean, it's a problem for us that we even do these things in a climate of legal intolerance. And then, you know, to put it on to our children, to make criminals of our children. You know, I mean, you can lose your children with a stunt like that. This is very touchy, and yet I see it as a First Amendment right. It's a matter of religious conviction. And I don't know, my hope is that someday this religious conviction issue is going to collide right into the psychedelic issue, because I do not see how we can live under a constitution that guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and say that psychedelic drugs are illegal. I mean, if the pursuit of happiness means anything, it must cover that. Now, I've had constitutional scholars explain to me that, well, no, you don't understand. Hamilton wanted it to say life, liberty, and the right to own property, and Jefferson objected. So they decided they'd put in language that was meaningless, so they settled on the pursuit of happiness. But I say, let's take that meaningless language in the Constitution and turn it into the greatest social revolution that's ever been seen. Children and psychedelics.